Thank you, Dr. Zuber. And now we'll hear from Dr. Spies.
Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and Ranking Member Johnson, other members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer of the Center for Open Science, a nonprofit technology company missioned to increase openness, integrity, and reproducibility of scholarly research. NSF has had a tremendous record of success by trusting sound scientific process. My recommendations today are in service of making an already efficient process work better. To be clear, the issues I will describe are not the same as headline-grabbing cases of fraud or misconduct, which are relatively rare. Science doesn't have an honesty problem. It has a communication problem. Scientific results gain credibility by demonstrating that evidence can be independently reproduced. This means that someone else can obtain similar evidence with the same data or with the same methodology. Reproducibility requires that the process used to obtain a result is described in sufficient detail. But science is complex. Brief descriptions of scientific papers cannot provide enough detail to capture the nuance necessary to facilitate reproducibility. We need to fall back on two simple concepts that everyone learned in elementary school. Show your work and share. If as much of the scientific process is open as is reasonably possible, the materials, methods, data, software, analyses, then replication can occur more easily, more frequently, and with greater efficacy. Openness should be the default for scientific communication, but currently it is not. The reward system in science is built around publishing. Getting published, however, has very little to do with research being reproducible. It has to do with novel results and clean narratives. But science is often messy and ambiguous, and if we hide the messiness away, we hamper scientific progress. We need to show our work, and we need to share. These same solutions can also prevent and correct those rare cases of misconduct. And even when we can't show all of our work, for example, when data must be kept private, there are still incremental steps that can increase credibility. Openness has another benefit. If paired with outreach and education, individuals who would otherwise not be able to participate in science would now be able to do so. And because these individuals are likely to be from groups typically underrepresented in science, we would see greater efficiency not only from an increased number of contributors, but from the benefits that diversity brings to collaboration and innovation. NSF has already taken steps to encourage openness. In my written testimony submitted for the record, I detail recommendations to expand upon that process. These fall into 5 categories. First, meta-science. NSF could fund investigations of reproducibility and reproducible practices. Second, infrastructure. NSF could fund technology that could, for example, facilitate open, reproducible practices or enable the analysis of data that must remain private. Third, training. NSF could add reproducibility training to its research fellowships and traineeships. Fourth, incentives. NSF could encourage the release of preprints for rapid dissemination of research. It could also fund pilots like registered reports, where publication and award are based upon the importance of the research question and quality of the methodology rather than the outcome. And fifth, community. NSF could convene stakeholders to discuss and adopt guidelines that would increase the pace of change. The scientific process that continuously improves our current understanding of the world is itself continuously improving. Critique and new evidence lead towards understanding. When we invest in NSF, we are investing in this process. And when we invest in openness and reproducibility, we are making the path towards understanding easier to navigate. This path leads us incrementally towards the next innovation that will increase the quality of life here and abroad. I would like to see us get there as quickly as possible, and I believe that an increased focus on openness and reproducibility will do just that. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And Dr. Spies, could you address how, when we have more openness and we get that, how that both helps the public research as well as the private, and how that might help us maximize the value in both areas, as well as make for more usable data and information, and how you would see that working in an ideal situation?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. In an open framework, we think about knowledge as a public good, and therefore its accessibility and the credibility that openness brings to it is available to anyone. Obviously, we need to facilitate that sometimes, but that basic accessibility is still there. We've heard many examples of what has come out of the NSF from a basic science standpoint. And so if we can increase the quality of that and increase the efficiency of that work, the work that comes out of this basic science programs, we can see then these end users receiving those benefits. They'll see the same efficiency gains. They'll see the lower risk, perhaps, because the quality would have been increased.
And is there maybe, in terms of the community, is there some of the fear, as you're talking about, that everybody makes mistakes? We were talking about, we find problems and things, but is there sort of a cultural fear of having that out there instead of sort of understanding, well, let's have a whole bigger community that's finding those mistakes sooner that we all make and sharing it in a way that helps for collaboration? I'm thinking, Thomas Edison obviously had to go through a lot of experiments before things get right. If he was sharing this in a bigger community, it might have all happened faster, right? Not that you don't want to, when you have your research, you want to maybe keep that to yourself too, I understand, but do we have a culture in the scientific community that makes it sort of punishing to have that information out there and shared?
This is certainly a cultural issue, and I don't know if it's necessarily punishing, but we don't really allow discourse around failure. Peer review happens after the work has been done, and so there's really very little influence that can have because you already did the work, and so it's a cultural issue, and so the perhaps fear. I think is across any area. No one wants to make mistakes, and no one wants to be seen for these mistakes. But we need to embrace them. That's a critical role in science. It's a very important part of the scientific process.
Thank you. I want to start with Dr. Spies. I want to applaud your work on making data more open. We know there are issues around that sometimes there's reasons why there have to be some data cannot just be all put out there directly as it is, but some have proposed that government agencies should only be allowed to make regulations based on studies that have posted all their data online. But in practice, this would make the majority of available research off limits to government agencies. Are there ways the government can increase the openness of the research it relies on without undermining its ability to use all the available science?
Yeah, there are many cases where we simply can't be completely open with work with respect to data privacy, security, or even just proprietary advantage. Some people need to maintain that intellectual property. But there are many ways that you can still be open, you can still be transparent, and really gaining that efficiency, credibility, and accessibility by taking certain steps. It's not an all or nothing thing. For example, with data privacy, there's a concept called secure computing, where the data can remain private, but you can still analyze it. Other people can still analyze that, but the data is never made fully available. Or you could release your methods and materials. So keep the data private, but release everything else around it. And this adds to the credibility. It might not add to the accessibility of that data, but you can still have a credible experience. You can still allow people to come into that and audit that process if need be. So we can still gain that credibility that we need in science.
Dr. Spies, you talked a little bit, actually quite a lot, about the incentives to share work. This is something we discussed a lot over the last Congress or two. Can you help us think a little bit about, and this is probably a subject for another hearing, this problem about publication and the incentives to publish something novel and not to share results that don't turn out in a novel way or that don't actually lead to something directly actionable, but in fact is really important for other people to know about because you may know this is not a profitable avenue. How do we square this right now? We have this problem about needing to publish to get research money, and yet if people are hiding their results because it doesn't seem actionable, it means you may have wasted money with a lot of people kind of following down that same path. Anyone have thoughts on that point?
Yeah, we have an incentives problem around publishing. And so we need to find a way to incentivize people to be more open, to take the risk, to be okay with failure, to put that out there and realize that that is adding to the corpus of knowledge. Any evidence is valuable in thinking about the science. And so there are ways to do this. And we really need to think more about this and test some of these things. The field of meta-science, we really need more of a commitment to that, to really understand what are the most efficacious ways to incentivize these things. Registered reports, I think, is a very good example where we review the work based on impact of the questions and the soundness of the methodology. And then no matter what the outcome, you still get a publication. Scientists still get funding, they still get the publication, they still get that reward. And so they have no reason then to need to hide things or gloss over details to sell it to journals.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing that I'm over, but maybe we could have a hearing on this issue because I think it is really important and it's something we could contribute in the field right now because a lot of scientists are very frustrated with the imperative right now. So maybe we could ask the chairman and the ranking member to do that. Thank you very much.
My question would be, would this open process be add to or maybe remove from the subjectivity of the grants and resources and the distribution thereof?
Open scientific process is going to be adding to what we know about science. And so as much as the quality of that is increased, I would think that it would increase decision-making. Related to subjectivity, the scientific process doesn't care about outcome. It's not an important part of it. The outcome is what happens from the scientific process. And so if we focus more on the process, more on the workflow, more on these other components that lead us to these outcomes, which we as humans really appreciate, which you appreciate in making policy. But if we focus on that process, then we can have more objectivity, I think, just across the board. And so again, if that can aid decision-making, then it should do so with regards to that process, to those methods.
So you would believe that the better the process, the more perfect the outcome?
The better the process, the smoother the way towards understanding, whatever that is. I wouldn't say perfect. Science admits that it's never perfect. We are always incrementally moving forward. But good process, open process can make that a more efficient trek down that road.
Thank you very much. I yield back.